Hey everyone, welcome back to AI with Pallavi. Ready to learn another AWS service in just 10 minutes? Let's get started. Let's learn AWS PrivateLink. Every time your application calls S3, Bedrock, or SageMaker from inside a VPC, that traffic is going out through a NAT gateway, hitting the public internet, and coming back in. You're paying for NAT gateway, data processing, you're exposing your traffic to the public network, and none of it was necessary. PrivateLink fixes all of that. AWS Private Link is a way to access AWS services or your own services privately without your traffic ever leaving the Amazon network. So, under the hood, it actually creates network interfaces called VPC endpoint within your VPC. When your application makes a call to S3 or Bedrock or any other service, instead of routing out through the internet gateway or NAT gateway, the traffic goes directly to that endpoint interface and travels through AWS internal network. So, no internet path, no public IP required on your resources. Think of it like having a private service counter inside your building. Instead of going outside, crossing the street, and queuing in public to access a service, there's a dedicated counter inside your own office. Same service, private access, no exposure. Now, there are two types of VPC endpoints, interface endpoint and gateway endpoint. Now, interface endpoint is supporting specific services. It actually creates an ENI and is chargeable per AC per hour, plus the data which you are processing, right? But for gateway endpoint, it is majorly for services like S3 and DynamoDB, and it's completely free. It also does not set up any ENI, and there is no security group. One major thing which you should look for in interface endpoint is that it supports private DNS. So your app calls the standard endpoint URL and AWS resolves it to the private ENI automatically. So you don't need any code change. While for gateway endpoint, it adds a route to your VPC route table. Traffic to S3 or DynamoDB is routed through that entry directly inside AWS, bypassing the NAT gateway. So this is the major difference you should understand. Rule: S3 and DynamoDB use gateway endpoint, free always. Everything else, including Bedrock, SageMaker, you have to use interface endpoints. Now, let's look at three real world use cases where you might need it. The first one, private access to Bedrock and SageMaker from a VPC, right? If you want to do inferencing, you're running inference workloads in a private subnet, your Lambda functions, ECS, EKS functions need to call Bedrock, right, to invoke a foundation model. Without private link, that traffic exists, but it goes through NAT gateway. It hits a Bedrock public endpoint. Now, if you don't want to do that, if you want to do private inferencing for sensitive data, use private interface. Second, exposing an internal service to another AWS account or team. You don't want this to actually go via internet, right? So you have built a shared platform service, a pricing engine, or authentication microservice that multiple teams across different AWS accounts need to call. So in that case also, with Private Link, you create an endpoint service backed by network load balancer. Other accounts create an interface endpoint pointing to your service. They call your service over private IP inside their own VPC, and they do not need that network to be public. Third, eliminate NAT gateway costs for S3 and DynamoDB. Now, if you don't want to spend a lot on NAT gateways, right, and also it might be difficult to manage, you just start using VPC endpoints. So basically, the endpoint that is a gateway endpoint, which is specifically for S3 and DynamoDB. The alternative to is paying NAT gateway data processing charges or on every single byte your application reads from or writes to S3. Also, at high throughput, this adds up to hundreds of dollars a month very quickly. So do check out this interface endpoints if you are using S3 and DynamoDB. Also, enable private DNS or interface endpoints. Your app calls the same URL with zero code changes. All right, so let's jump into the console. VPC endpoints live inside the VPC console under endpoints. Hit create endpoint. The first decision you have to make is the endpoint type which you want to choose. Now you can see that I already have an endpoint type of gateway present here, and you can see the endpoint ID, VPC ID it is associated with, the DNS records, the service name. So this one was created for S3. So that's why you can see this is specifically for S3 gateway endpoint. There are route tables which you can configure how you would like to route the traffic and the subnets associated with it. So let's go ahead and create another endpoint. Now you can give any name to your endpoint. Let me give it test endpoint, and you can choose different types: AWS services, private link, ready, partner services, that is also possible. If you want to connect to any SaaS services at marketplace, possible. Service network connected to VPC lattice, any other resources, right? For example, specific to RDS, you can connect EC2 instance, connect endpoint, and endpoint services that use NLBs and gateway load balancers. So these are some readily available options which you have. So let's go ahead and try to create it for Bedrock. So I'm just selecting AWS services here. If I want to enable cross-region replication, so in that case, if I want to use that endpoint, I will enable cross-region endpoint, and then I'll have to select which all regions I want to do, right? So that's something which you can choose. Now there are different services. If I want to create it for Bedrock, let me choose Bedrock. So for Bedrock, that means any traffic going to Bedrock service in US East 1 will have to use this particular endpoint. Now then I can select the VPC which I want, the private DNS name, the IPs, the subnets which I want to select. So there might be, if I select all these, there are subnets specific to different AZs, and I can select all of these subnets within my VPC endpoint. So you have to choose the VPC, choose the private subnets where your application runs. You need at least one subnet per availability zone for redundancy. And PrivateLink actually creates a network interface in each selected subnet. So this is the elastic network interface your application traffic actually routes through. And once done, you can select the security group as well, whichever you want. Security group is one setting people consistently get wrong. So attaching a security group to the endpoint network interface itself. The security group must allow inbound HTTPS on port 443 from your application security group. If you attach the wrong security group here, your application calls will fail at the network level itself, and you might spend a lot of hours debugging what it looks like, right? And an application error. So this is mostly the error at the network end. Now you have different policies as well which you can set up, right? So this is a full access policy where we are not declining anything. It can be a custom policy where you want to send specific traffic itself, right? So that's how you can create an endpoint. So once this is done, you can go ahead and create a VPC endpoint specific to Bedrock. So let's go ahead and create it. So once created, you will be able to see different DNS names present, the service name because this is specific to Bedrock, then different endpoint IDs, the VPC ID, it's linked to different interfaces. So this is how you can create an interface endpoint, and this can be reused across different services or different applications within your own network. Let's quickly look at some pro tips from production, right? So gateway endpoints for S3 and DynamoDB are completely free. Interface endpoints for everything else, Bedrock, SageMaker, ECR, Secrets Manager are charged per AZ per hour plus per GB of data process. So if you're creating interface endpoints in multiple AZs, that's a per AZ cost running 24/7. Audit which endpoints you're actually using. Idle interface endpoints still bill you for the hourly charge, so do audit it. Second, if private DNS isn't working, check that your VPC has DNS host names and DNS resolution both enabled. These two settings are in the VPC configuration panel, and both must be on for private DNS on private link endpoints to resolve it correctly. Third, when you create an endpoint service to expose your own service to other accounts, you can require acceptance for each connection request. Turn this on for production. Without it, any AWS account that knows your endpoint service name can connect to your service. Acceptance gives you an explicit approval step and a full audit trail of which accounts are connected. So this is another important tip. Now there are two different patterns. You can have VPC endpoint where you have an ENI in private subnet connected to Bedrock. Then that is via AWS Service Access, your VPC and AWS. Now your endpoint service provider where as a consumer account, you have an interface endpoint, you call the endpoint service using private IP. It can connect to network load balancer and connect to your platform service. So these are the two major patterns which is being used. So if your team is currently routing AI inference traffic through NAT Gateway, drop the service you're calling in the comments. I want to see how many teams are paying NAT Gateway cost they could eliminate today. Next in the series, we will cover more network features. So happy learning. And just like that, you have learned another AWS service in 10 minutes. Hit that subscribe button if you like this video and comment if you have any questions related to this service or if there is any service you want me to focus next. Happy learning!